Hey, how's it going? Happy New Year. It's been a while since I made a video. I've had a few that I made a ranking of the Halloween movies, but I end up not being too lazy to edit it. So I don't know if that'll ever see the light of day, maybe sometime. I'm also just getting over a cold somewhat, so if my voice sounds all fucked up and weird, that's it. But I want just to make one final video for this year. I made a few this year, kind of fell off. Didn't just got too lazy with the editing, but I'm hoping to try to be a little better about it this year and really just try to make videos when I feel more creative. Also, what I want to work on, especially for next month, is I want to make my cat's here. I want to make a ranking, or not ranking, but a reflection of the year of movies that I watched. I kept a list to make sure I remembered every movie that I watched this year. I made it to about a little bit over 200, which is pretty good. I was hoping to hit for like up until like I think March. I had a consistent streak of a movie a day, and then just life kind of got in the way. And then I remember there was like 1 or 2 months where I didn't really watch much stuff, but overall definitely watched a pretty decent amount of movies. Things I really wanted to achieve. Watch some stuff that I've been meaning to watch for many, many years now. Like on the top of my head, I could think of like the Godfather trilogy is what I started with. I watched that on New Year's Day last year, and yeah, obviously incredible. The Deer Hunter, just so many movies that I've wanted to see for a while. There's probably gonna be more when I go through the list. I finally watched all of the Halloween movies. I've wanted to do that for a while now, but never really gave the time. Halloween I did really good. That's where I think I caught up on a lot of movie watching because during that season, it just to me horror movies are some of the easiest movies to put on and watch, enjoy, and so yeah, definitely I'll try to make that list. I'll also try to make a ranking of all the movies that came out last year, 2025. Still, I've only seen I think about 8 new movies that came out this year. So yeah, very lacking on that front. I'm not someone who's in the camp of movies suck nowadays. I think movies are, there's obviously going to be struggles and down years and everything like that, but I think movies, there's still some incredible movies that are being made that are still putting out some great stuff. Yeah, I'm hoping to watch some more movies in 2025, so I might make that probably the first week of January, I'm guessing, because yeah, there's some big movies that I got to catch up on. I think last year I watched about 15, and that's where I'm kind of hoping to hit, and then slowly through the years catch up on 2025. Because to me, I just find that there's so many other great movies that I haven't seen that I haven't educated myself on. So that's where to me that usually takes first priority. And newer movies to me are kind of like secondary. Crumb from 1994. This is directed by Terry Zigoff. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he is a very fascinating director. Really good filmography, but not much on there. He directed Bad Santa, which is probably his most popular, Ghost World, and then this movie. And then I think he has like two kind of other movies that I haven't seen and are lesser known than those movies. But yeah, he has a very, very impressive filmography. He's one of those guys you probably wish if he like what could have been if he got to make more movies and why someone that's that talented doesn't make more movies. But hey, quality over quantity for sure. So essentially, going into this movie was recommended to me a little bit ago. I don't remember exactly when, but it was recommended by a good friend of mine who's really into movies and has a great taste and endless great recommendations. And he recommended this. I didn't. I like to go into movies blind. I'm not someone who wants to know everything, watch a trailer, none of that. I rather just see what it is for myself rather than have someone market it to me. And yeah, so I threw it on, and it was because I watched American Splendor, which my quick review of that movie is also really great. I had a great time with that movie, and Robert Crumb is a character in that movie for like 10-15 minutes in the movie. And that kind of reminded me. I was like, "Oh yeah, there a movie about him that was recommended in the movie." There's even a funny joke where they're like, "Oh yeah, there's a movie about him too if you want to go see that." But yeah, so I put it on and I was like, "Okay, this would be interesting." I guess he worked with Harvey Pekar. He drew some artwork for his comic book. But wasn't really too familiar. But throughout the documentary, I easily did start to recognize some of his artwork and definitely his style. His style to me is really something that almost just seems like the standard for like what I really imagine of that kind of mid 50s, 60s. What I remember growing up, the funnies and the newspaper, like that's kind of his artwork is really something that like really shaped that type of generation in that era of comic books. But yeah, to me, this documentary was really not at all what I was expecting. I didn't even know it was a documentary going in. Like that's how little I knew about this movie. When I went into it, I just threw it on. I had no idea if this was gonna be a biography, if this was gonna be like an acted out movie. No idea. And yeah, it definitely to me, from what I remember, was like the turn of like, okay, this is gonna be a lot stranger than I was expecting. Was in like I think it's probably a few minutes into the movie when you're first meeting Crumb, and he's just sitting on his like kitchen table or whatever. He has a sketchbook out, and he also has a yearbook out, and he's drawing pictures. He's like, these are all my high school crushes that I had on, and I could never get with them. Couldn't even talk to them. That kind of crap, and and then he before the it kind of goes into the intro. He's like, oh, and what it would be like to have Natalie Wood, I don't know her name, but whoever it was right now, her 17-year-old self, and I was like, okay, what the fuck? And then it just goes into this movie, and slowly and surely, it is a very, very fascinating documentary. It slowly unravels who this guy is, what's his background. Although it doesn't really delve much, like it's not actually a very. If you really want to focus on his career, I feel like I have a very half-assed idea of how he got popular and how he really took off. Like it's seen more just about him creating art more than like anything. Like I find a lot of these movies, or what I expect from these movies, to really focus on like the career aspect of it. Like I've watched like some Marvel documentaries, Stan Lee documentaries, and they really focus in on like how successful the comic book was, and how much money they were making from it, and how much kids were reading it, how much they sold. They don't really specify that at all. They kind of specify that he's been creating artwork and drawing comics, and him and his brothers for basically since they were children, and it turned into, I guess, Zap magazine, which also had some other underground comic book artists. And that's really all I fundamentally know. I don't really know how successful these were. They sell very well. Like, you assume so, because the guy seems to have a decent enough existence, but he's obviously not living super lavish. He also maybe super cheap. You never know. But it was like that part's not really specified. But you basically, it's more of a true portrait of him and his family. And wow, was it fucking strange. I think to me, he is an interesting artist, for sure. I think also too, one thing that I'm not very familiar with some of the material of his work. Like for the documentary, you're just getting quick glimpses, flashes. There was like maybe one or two strips that they really kind of read through. So I don't really have any idea of his material, the satire in his work. But just judging from the artwork, it is very, very fascinating how he goes about creating his artwork. He kind of basically comes at it from a very psychological perspective, it seems, and is very forthcoming with his psychology. It's one of those, comparatively to most comic books and, even a lot of artwork, you're kind of getting more of a caricature of someone. You're getting Spider-Man and his problems, and maybe that kind of correlates with the writer's problems or what he's trying to give to someone. But he was just like, yeah, I'm really into Bugs Bunny being hot. So I'll draw these like sexy bunnies. It's like I swear to God, this guy probably was one of the first, at least open. Obviously, I don't know the history of furrydom, but like he's one of those first few open people about his like fetishes, his perversions, and especially at a time where that was even more of a faux pas and even more of somewhat of an illegal thing. I think that the documentary kind of really kept out like how censored he was, because it almost made it seem like he was because he was very independent. He was free to do a lot of this stuff, but it doesn't really go too much into the controversy of things surrounding it. And I think slowly through the documentary, there's a lot of stuff about his art and his work and his life that can be really difficult to shake, I guess, in a way. And I thought there was an interesting piece with one of the, I guess he was like an art expert. He talked about kind of, it is kind of the thing. It's like, if you're looking for a moral artist, it's like, where do you draw the line? Is that even a possibility? Should artists be moral people? Whatever. Because there's some interesting stuff, like, obviously Celine created some of the most classic literature of the early 20th century. But the dude was also a Nazi sympathizer, so it's like, what the fuck? How the fuck can this happen? And that's interesting too with his artwork. I think what to me one of the more interesting points was one thing you'll definitely notice is he does have a lot of old racist caricatures of black people and old racist stereotypes, chicken, watermelon, being poor, affects, everything like that. And I thought, to me, I need to do more research into, I guess, his kind of ideas for it, because it does seem he did it as a point, and it didn't seem like, from what I understand, that it was just for edginess sake. But this is like the whitest of white dudes ever. It's like, come on, man. I don't know if you have the rights just to throw around this kind of stuff and use it as liberally as he could. It was interesting that his point was that the only people that criticize him for it are white liberals, which is, in some ways it could be a good point to be made, but he doesn't really make one. He just says, yeah, white liberals criticize my work, whatever. Which, it's a good way to somewhat look at shit, but also, too, why not actually address that in some way. He was also very anti-establishment, which I liked, and I could really, there's one part of the documentary, though, he definitely seems like a very much of an asshole, and I think from what I'm gathering from his family, his mental illness runs throughout them. But like the guy at the comic shop who was just like, hey, I'm a big fan of your work, anyway, I could just get a quick signature. He's like, no, I don't believe in signatures. And it's just like this awkward looks down, looking at all their bullshit. And he also seemed to be really, he seemed to love any compliments of his work, and really seemed to kind of play into his kind of greatness and, genius to come up with this kind of stuff, which I'm like, made him definitely a lot less likable. And then truly, to me, the hardest part of the documentary is probably about 20 minutes, because I haven't really addressed his brothers yet. So that is Charles and Max Crumb, and they are very, very interesting characters, to say the least. They also do not look anything like Crumb. Crumb truly looks like a cartoon character, and his brothers, to me, looked like almost crazy serial killers. Like, they could have easily fit into a Texas Chainsaw movie, for sure. And slowly, when I think what I saw with Charles, for sure, is obviously a very, very intelligent man. It was interesting that eventually his writings became literal scribbles. Like, he wrote so tiny they just came off as scribbles. He seems to live a very depressive, slow life. I'm guessing for him, for sure, definitely an autism diagnosis would probably be accurate. Obviously, I'm no psychologist, and I don't know. It just seemed like he was very routine oriented, like the same thing. I'm not gonna read too much into that. Just kind of living a meager existence, cooped up all day with his mom. Doesn't seem to want to be social. He even makes like a very dark line, I thought, where he talks about how he hasn't had any sexual stimulation in years, and mentions he's like, and if they ever came back, I don't think I would want them to, which I thought was like, what the fuck that's very fucking sad. And then you kind of learn, okay, maybe it's not as sad after you learn what he wanted. Because that's basically what the movie comes down to, is at the end you get a spoiler, it gets revealed that he is a pedophile, that he was very attracted to a young boy from a show, I don't remember, from like a serial from the 50s. And that definitely changes a lot of things. And also, to me, the passive way that Crumb kind of mentions, it's like, oh yeah, my brother's a pedophile. This is too funny. What's next? And it's just like, okay, maybe that's the way he's trying to cope with it. But it didn't really seem like he was too bothered by the fact that his brother was a pedophile, which I find pretty fucked up. And then on the other end, his other brother Max, who was also very strange, I guess, really into kind of Eastern medicines and that kind of, this basically bastardization of Eastern medicines and practices, who has like has a bed of nails and sits on it. He also ingests tape, like this weird fucking string shit that says it takes him like 6 weeks to pass. He seems to live a very bizarre life, and to me, probably the most like fucked up part of this whole documentary was when he's like, oh yeah, and then I really got into molesting, and you're like, what the fuck? You got into molesting? And he essentially made it seem like he just picked up this hobby of molesting women. And that part was also really fucking disturbing. Especially seeing Crumb, and also, again, not really be bothered by this and laughing it off, and listening to his brother's story about, like, victimizing this woman. And it was just awful. It was fucking terrible. I couldn't believe that someone would just pass away. And that's where it's really hard with Crumb. Crumb seems like they all, in my opinion, seem like three perverts for sure. Obviously, it would be really interesting to hear from the sisters. They were not part of this documentary. There's also a really disturbing story about Max and him assaulting his sister. Like, again, this was like a very fucking heavy documentary, and I thought this was just gonna be about like a comic book writer who might have had some like kooky beliefs, and I was like, okay, this is a lot more fucking dark than I was ever expecting. It was definitely, to me, it seems like they all had their own issues, and it doesn't really truly explain where these kind of came from. They seem to live, they had, I guess, a hatred of their father. Their mother kind of went along with it and was addicted to amphetamines, but it's like, that doesn't really, to me, give any sort of idea of how this kind of happens to people, where they come to this kind of place. Really, Robert was the only guy who was able to kind of make a profit off of his own perversions. Is that he just basically, he turned his perversions into art. These guys seem to hide themselves all day in their house and do weird shit, I guess. It was one of those documentaries that I was not expecting it to go this way. It blew my mind in a lot of ways. See, it's very hard to cope or comprehend with, kind of the really fucked up nature of this family and this person. But definitely a fascinating thing. It makes me definitely more intrigued to more about Crumb, and I kind of want to read a lot. If I can find, maybe while I'm out, find a copy of like a collector's volume of his work or something like that. I definitely would want to check it out. I'd be curious to see kind of the material of his work. Well, I would give this movie an 85 out of 100. I think it's very well done. And there's definitely some parts where it kind of drags. It feels a bit slow. It's definitely not a very flashy documentary, and definitely in the terms of the editing, I think it's actually very subtle in the way that it allows you to come to your own understandings of his work. I find that's one thing I really appreciate. There are some documentaries on either controversial stuff or controversial events, whatever have you, and I find a lot of times they will bring on this supposed moral voice or someone who has all the right answers, and they're going to tell you exactly what to believe. And I like that this documentary doesn't really have that. They didn't have someone who was like super negative about his work. They had people that were critical of his work, but they didn't have people that were absolute haters of him. I would have loved to see a lot more of people who were a lot more in disdain, maybe more religious people who probably would be quite offended and would want this kind of work not to be allowed. So I would have kind of appreciated to see more of that perspective. But I like that this documentary doesn't give a favorable perspective of Robert Crumb very much, but also doesn't really totally distort him. It allows you to kind of make your own decisions on what you think of his artwork, what you think of his lifestyle, and his family. And I think that's very important when it comes to making art and to making a documentary, something that is educational in a way. So thank you so much for watching, and have a good New Year.